My mom kicked me out for my stepdad's kids. Now she's homeless begging for my help, but I shut the door. I opened the door, and there she was, my mother, standing in the cold, tears streaming down her face. She looked nothing like the woman who had thrown me out years ago. Her perfect life, gone. Her husband left her. And now, the same woman who once told me I wasn't part of her new family was standing on my doorstep, begging for help. But I didn't forget. I didn't forget the night she packed my bags, the way she turned her back on me for kids that weren't even hers. And I wasn't about to save her now. I used to think my mom and I were close. It was just the two of us for years, and we got through everything together. She always told me I was her world, that no matter what happened, family came first. But that all changed when she met him. The man who would replace me in her life, my stepdad. At first, I tried to be happy for her. She seemed so in love, and for the first time in years, she wasn't struggling. But it didn't take long before I realized where I stood. He had 2 kids of his own, and suddenly they became the center of her world. Our one-on-one time disappeared. Everything became about them. Then, one day, my mom sat me down with a serious expression. "Things are getting tight," she said. "We don't have enough space for everyone." I felt my stomach drop. I knew where this was going. And sure enough, the next words out of her mouth shattered everything. "You're old enough to be on your own." I begged her to reconsider. I had nowhere to go. I wasn't even out of school yet, barely making ends meet. But she didn't care. My stepdad's kids needed a real home, and I was just in the way. So she packed my bags, handed me a few dollars, and told me to figure it out. For years, I struggled. I lived in my car for a while, slept on couches, worked brutal hours just to stay afloat. Not once did she check in. Not once did she ask if I was okay. But that was fine. I learned how to survive without her. I built a life on my own, and I swore I would never go back. And then, out of nowhere, she called. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, she finally realized what she had done. But I was wrong. She didn't call because she regretted kicking me out. She called because she needed something. And when I found out what it was, I knew exactly how I was going to handle it. I ignored her first few calls. She hadn't spoken to me in years. Why now? But she didn't stop. Voicemail after voicemail, texts piling up. Finally, curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. The second I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. Her tone was different, not the confident, dismissive mother I remembered. She sounded desperate. "I need to see you," she pleaded. "It's important." I almost laughed. The last time she called me important, she was kicking me out of her house. I agreed to meet, but only because I wanted answers. When I saw her, she looked exhausted, like life had chewed her up and spit her out. She fidgeted, struggling to make eye contact. Then, she finally admitted the truth. Her husband had left her. Turns out the perfect family she chose over me had fallen apart. Her stepkids moved out, her husband drained their savings, and she had nothing left. No money, no house, no support. The same woman who once told me to figure it out was now looking at me like I was her last hope. And she expected me to save her. I let her finish her sob story. Then I asked the one question that had haunted me for years. "Did you ever regret kicking me out?" She hesitated. For just a second. And that's when I knew the truth. She never thought twice about it. She tried to justify it. Tried to say she did what she had to do. That she thought I'd be okay, but I wasn't okay. I had suffered, struggled, and built my life from nothing. All while she played house with a family that wasn't even hers. Then came the final insult. She asked if she could stay with me. She had nowhere else to go. She needed a fresh start. Just like that, the woman who threw me away like I didn't matter was begging me for a place to live. I took a deep breath, looked her dead in the eyes, and said the words I had waited years to say. No, and for the first time in my life, I watched her be the one left out in the cold. She stared at me in disbelief. Like she truly hadn't considered the possibility that I would say no. Her lips trembled, and for a second I thought she was going to apologize, that maybe, just maybe, she finally understood what she had done to me. But instead, she got angry. "You're really going to let your own mother be homeless?" she snapped. Like she wasn't the same person who left me on the streets years ago. I let out a bitter laugh. "You did it to me first," I said coldly. "Why should I care now?" Then she dropped a bombshell, one I never saw coming. She didn't just want a place to stay. She wanted me to give her money, thousands of dollars, not just to get back on her feet, but to pay off debts that her stepkids and ex-husband left behind. That's when it all clicked. She didn't regret kicking me out. She didn't miss me. She just needed a replacement. She had spent years sacrificing me for them, giving them everything, choosing them over her own child. And now that they were gone, I was her backup plan. I asked her if she ever called her stepkids for help. She scoffed, shaking her head. "They don't owe me anything." I raised an eyebrow, and I do silence. For the first time, she had nothing to say. She shifted tactics, trying to guilt-trip me. She said I was being cruel, that she had made mistakes but still deserved forgiveness. That family is family, the same excuse she used when she threw me out, but now it didn't work in her favor. I told her the truth. She wasn't my family anymore. She had made her choice. And now she had to live with it, just like I did. Then I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Find someone else to use, I said, and for the first time I watched her be the one with nowhere to go. Word spread fast. My mother didn't just leave quietly, she made sure everyone knew that I had abandoned her. She ran to family members, sobbing about how her own child had turned their back on her. She left out the part where she threw me out first. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Some relatives took her side immediately. My aunt called me, furious. She's your mother. She raised you. How could you do this to her? I asked her where she was when my mother kicked me out. Silence. Because the truth was, nobody cared back then. My grandmother begged me to reconsider. You're better than this, she said. She tried to convince me that holding on to anger wouldn't help anything. But this wasn't about anger, it was about self-respect. I wasn't going to be used just because it was convenient for her. Then there were the people who saw through her lies. My cousin, who had watched everything unfold years ago, called me immediately. She's just mad she ran out of people to take advantage of, he said. He told me she had tried hitting him up for money too. Apparently I wasn't her only failed backup plan. Some of my mother's old friends even reached out to apologize. They had believed her lies at first, but when they learned the truth that she had thrown me away for a man who later abandoned her, they were disgusted. One of them even told her, you got what you deserved. But my favorite reaction? Her stepkids, the ones she sacrificed me for. They wanted nothing to do with her. She reached out, begging them for help, and they shut her down instantly, the same way she had once shut me down. And that was when it hit her. She had lost everything. Her husband, her stepkids, her real child, all gone. She had spent her whole life choosing them over me. And in the end, none of them cared. So now she was alone, completely and utterly alone. And for the first time she had to live with the same feeling she once forced on me, the feeling of having nowhere to go. My mother tried one last time to break me. She showed up at my workplace, making a scene in the parking lot. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red from crying, and her voice full of fake desperation. Please, just talk to me. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. I walked right past her like she didn't exist. She grabbed my arm, her voice turning sharp. You think you're better than me now? I turned, looked her dead in the eyes and said, no, I just learned how to survive without you. She recoiled like I had slapped her, because that was the truth she didn't want to hear. Then she started shouting, loud enough for everyone in the lot to hear. I'm your mother. I gave you life. You owe me. The entitlement dripped from her voice. Even after everything, she still thought she had control over me. But the difference between us, I had already let go. Security got involved. A guard came over, asking if I wanted her removed. I glanced at my mother, waiting for her to see how far she had fallen. But she didn't. She still looked at me like I was the villain, like I was the one betraying her. She would never understand. I shook my head at the guard. She's leaving, I said. My mother's eyes widened. You're choosing to walk away from your own blood. I nodded once. Just like you did. Her face crumpled, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She left that day, but the consequences kept hitting her. She had no job, no money, no one left to manipulate. She bounced from cheap motels to old friends' couches, but no one let her stay long. Eventually, she ended up exactly where she left me years ago, homeless. Meanwhile, I thrived. My career took off, my relationships were stronger than ever, and I had finally built the life I deserved. No more guilt, no more chasing after love that was never real. I was free. And my mother? She was finally feeling what it was like to have no one to turn to. I heard through the family that she tried to get back in contact again. She wanted a real conversation this time, but I had nothing left to say. She had burned that bridge years ago, and now she was standing in the ashes all alone. People asked if I regretted not helping her, if I felt guilty for letting her struggle, but why should I? She didn't regret throwing me away. She only regretted losing someone who could have saved her. And that wasn't my problem. In the end, she made her choice, and I made mine. The difference? Mine led to success, happiness, and freedom. Hers led straight to rock bottom, and I wasn't about to throw her a rope, not after she had cut mine years ago. I never spoke to my mother again after that day. Not because I was angry, because I was done. I had spent years grieving the mother I thought I had, the one who was supposed to love me unconditionally. But the truth was, she never saw me as her child. She saw me as disposable, and in the end, that's exactly what she became to me. My life flourished without her. No more guilt, no more feeling like I had to prove my worth to someone who never cared. I surrounded myself with people who actually valued me, friends, mentors, even my in-laws who treated me more like family than she ever did. I built something out of the wreckage she left me in, and I was proud of that. As for her, she never recovered. The stepkids she chose over me, they never looked back. The husband she sacrificed everything for, gone without a trace. And the family members who once defended her, they slowly stopped answering her calls. I heard through the grapevine that she was staying in a shelter, that the woman who once threw me onto the streets had now ended up on them herself. Some people thought that was cruel, that she didn't deserve it. But I disagreed. She deserved every second of it. Some relatives tried to push me to forgive her. She's still your mother, they said. But a real mother doesn't abandon her child for convenience. A real mother doesn't throw their own blood away for someone else's kids. She made her choice, and I made mine. And I chose to move on without her. Did I feel guilty? Not even for a second. I had given her every chance to be in my life, and every time she had chosen herself. So this time I chose me, and I would never regret that. People say that karma always catches up, and in her case it did. She had everything she wanted once: a husband, a new family, a fresh start. And she lost it all. The same way she left me alone in the cold, she now had to fend for herself. And she had no one left to blame. I built a life without her. A good one. A strong one. A life she will never be a part of. And as I look at where I am now compared to where she ended up, I realize something. She was right about one thing that day she kicked me out. I was strong enough to survive on my own. I just never needed her to do it. It's been years since I last saw my mother. She still tries to reach out from time to time, but her messages go unanswered. I don't need to hear her excuses, her justifications, or her pleas. She didn't regret losing me, she regretted losing what I could do for her. And I have no interest in being her second choice. Last I heard, she was still struggling. No stable job, no real place to call home. The people she sacrificed me for, they never looked back. And the life she thought she was building? Gone. Meanwhile, I've built something incredible for myself without her, and despite her. And that's how Op's mom went from kicking them out to getting kicked to the curb herself. What do you think? Did she deserve a second chance, or was karma right on time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this story more than Op's mom enjoyed making terrible life choices, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. See you in the next one.